year is 1331. The sun hangs heavy over the Indian Ocean, turning the turquoise waves into sheets of blinding glass. A dhow, its hull stitched together with coconut fiber and its triangular sail swollen with the monsoon wind, cuts through the water. On board, the famous traveler Ibn Battuta strains his eyes toward the horizon. He is not looking for a wilderness. He is looking for a metropolis. Slowly it rises from the sea, a skyline of white coral stone, minarets piercing the blue sky, and palaces 4 stories high. This is Mogadishu. At this moment, it is the apex of civilization on the East African coast, a city so wealthy that its merchants feed their camels distinct herbs to improve the taste of their meat, and its sultan walks on carpets of pure silk, never touching the dust of the earth. But 3 days' sail to the south, in the shadowed archipelagos of what is now Tanzania, a storm is brewing. It is not a storm of wind and rain, but of ambition. Another city, Kilwa Kisiwani, is waking up. Its rulers are hungry. They are eyeing the trade routes that Mogadishu controls, specifically the river of gold flowing from the interior. This was not merely a competition between 2 ports. It was a battle for the soul of the Indian Ocean trade. This is the story of the great rivalry between the northern titan, Mogadishu, and the rising city-states of the Swahili Coast. To understand this rivalry, one must understand the wind. For 1,000 years, the Kaskazi and Kusi monsoon winds acted as a conveyor belt, pushing ships from India and Arabia to Africa and back again. Geography dealt Mogadishu the winning hand early on. Located on the Horn, it was the first port of call for exhausted sailors crossing the open ocean. By the 10th century, Mogadishu had established itself not just as a marketplace, but as a gatekeeper. If you wanted African ivory, ambergris, or leopard skins, you dealt with the Somali merchants of the north. They set the prices, they controlled the flow. For centuries, the southern cities, places like Mombasa, Malindi, and Lamu, lived in Mogadishu's shadow. They were prosperous, certainly, but they were secondary. However, the economic geology of Africa was about to shift the balance of power. Far to the south, past the Zambezi River, lay the port of Sofala. It was a humid, fever-ridden outpost, insignificant in appearance, but it possessed a secret. It was the outlet for the gold mines of Great Zimbabwe. For generations, Mogadishu had cleverly maintained control over Sofala, managing the gold trade by proxy. The northern merchants would sail past the southern cities, pick up the gold, and sell it to the Arabs and Persians at an exorbitant markup. The trigger for the great rivalry was a realization by the rulers of Kilwa. Why let the north hold the keys to the southern treasury? The transformation began in the late 12th and early 13th centuries with the arrival of the Shirazi distinct cultural and political lineage. Legend tells of Ali ibn al-Hassan, a prince from Shiraz, Persia, who bought the island of Kilwa. While the literal truth of the migration is debated by historians, the political reality was undeniable. A new dynasty had arrived, one that claimed a pedigree equal to, or greater than, the sheer commercial weight of Mogadishu. The pivotal moment came when Kilwa militarily and diplomatically seized control of Sofala. They cut the middleman. Suddenly, the gold of Zimbabwe flowed directly into the coffers of Kilwa. The result was an architectural and cultural explosion. In Kilwa, the sultans built the Husuni Kubwa, a palace of coral and lime that rivaled anything in Europe at the time. They minted their own coins, inscribed with rhymes praising Allah and the Sultan. This was a direct challenge to Mogadishu's hegemony. The coast was no longer a monopoly, it was a bipolar world. The rivalry was fought with tariffs, spies, and religious patronage. It was a cold war of prestige. Both cities utilized Islam not just as a faith, but as a diplomatic passport. To be a sultan on the Swahili coast was to be a cosmopolitan figure. These rulers spoke Swahili, Arabic, and often Persian. They competed to attract the most learned scholars, the most skilled stonemasons, and the wealthiest merchants from across the ocean. Mogadishu, under the Fakir ad-Din dynasty, and later the powerful Ajuran Sultanate, responded by tightening its grip on the northern interior. They diversified. They became the masters of the textile industry, producing the famous Benadir cloth that was prized as far away as Egypt. If Kilwa had the gold, Mogadishu had the industry and the strategic location nearest to Mecca. The tension shaped the very layout of the coast. Cities fortified their walls. Alliances shifted like the sand. Mombasa and Malindi, caught between these two giants, often played one against the other. Malindi, chafing under the dominance of Mombasa and the influence of Kilwa, would often look north to Mogadishu for friendship, creating a checkerboard of feuds that spanned 2,000 miles of coastline. Yet despite the fierce competition, they never destroyed one another. They couldn't. They were bound together by the same ocean, the same religion, and the same language. It was a rivalry of siblings, bitter, envious, but blood-related. They created a unified Swahili culture, a civilization of coral stone and cosmopolitanism that was unique in human history. But this golden age of rivalry was living on borrowed time. The end did not come from within, but from the unknown waters of the Atlantic. In 1498, 3 ships with red crosses on their sails rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese did not care for the intricate diplomatic balances of the Swahili coast. They saw only Moors to be defeated and trade routes to be seized. The tragedy of the great rivalry is that it left the coast divided just when it needed to be united. When the Portuguese cannons turned on Kilwa in 1505, blasting the beautiful coral palaces into dust, there was no grand coalition to stop them. Malindi, arguably acting on centuries of accumulated grievance against its neighbors, actually allied with the Portuguese. The complex game of chess between North and South had left the board open for a player who simply kicked over the table. Kilwa was sacked, its golden age extinguished in a week of fire. Mogadishu, further north and more heavily defended, managed to resist the worst of the Portuguese occupation, but its monopoly was broken. The delicate ecosystem of the Indian Ocean trade was militarized and dismantled. Today, if you walk the ruins of Kilwa Kisiwani, you see the skeleton of the Great Mosque, open to the sky, invaded by baobab roots. In Mogadishu, the old Hamar wine district still stands, though scarred by modern conflict, a testament to a time when it was the city of Islam. Why does this rivalry matter today? It matters because it shatters the dark myth that Africa was isolated or static before the colonial era. The struggle between Mogadishu and the southern city-states was a sophisticated, high-stakes geopolitical drama involving currency manipulation, international diplomacy, and global trade networks. It reminds us that long before the modern era of globalization, the Indian Ocean was already a global village, and the Swahili coast was its marketplace. The great rivalry drove these cities to greatness, pushing them to build higher, sail further, and dream bigger, leaving behind a legacy of stone and spirit that even centuries of cannon fire could not entirely erase.